Okay. Now I'm going to attempt to go over the character systems, which is plentiful in their own, on their own. But I've changed this a little bit because if anyone has used the previous one that actually understood this chart a little bit, they would have noticed that the treasure chests, event triggers, and there's one other item. They were all pretty much linked to an NPC, which means they had overbloated parameters that had nothing to do with a treasure chest or nothing to do with an event trigger in general. Before, I had everything that had to do with event processing or storing of events and stuff like that. I had all of that within the NPC. Now, the NPC is specifically an NPC object. I have a new object, or should I say a new component, called a event object component. And what this will do is it will add the ability to whoever has it attached to them to be able to store events that needs to be processed to it. So even if I have an event trigger area, or if I have a treasure chest that would process an event once you open it, or if I have a resource point that can also process events, they all can be pointed back to an event object. And the event object specifically lets you get a list of all the events in the database and set that to the object. So on top of it being a treasure chest, it can also execute a series of events or can be used to trigger other events in the world. And that should help simplify those objects in general. So let's see. Let's go from there then. We're going to start with the character objects. So we have the base PC hero, which is the main operation of a character. Your controlled character or your AI character in general. I have various things in here to be able to, of course, get the system handles, which is pretty much every single place, which will also get the RPG state, the game HUD, and technically it should get the game instance as well if the character for some reason has to directly connect to the database manager. A new thing I had to add is the ability to move the actual character to the root of the capsule. One thing I've seen in mostly everywhere is when we have the actual character capsule, the character may be loaded here at the root, which is the center of the capsule, and not at the very tip of the capsule. And then that will cause them to float. So what I did was I pretty much did calculations on here to be able to move on the beginning of play to be able to move the character's root object if it's called root. You can also change that name here to whatever the root node of your character is to be able to move that character to the actual capsule location within the world. So that way you will not have floating characters within your object. I have also removed, if you can't tell, the majority of everything that used to be on the tick within the PC Hero. This is to save information for the, not save information, but reduce the frames per second hit that the PC character was causing. Because I was doing different types of scans, different types of checks, and things like that. It was too much on the system, especially when you had multiple characters following the main character, which is why I completely got rid of that and only using a main character for the system in general for right now, because of the overtax that it was doing on the system for processing these blueprint passes. So things like checking the AI's death, checking the PC character's death if it's a playable character, to doing your interactive scans. I'm no longer using cam locks because I was locking the camera to certain heights depending on how you move the camera. Processing of events is now on a tick, and recovering your stamina meter and stuff like that. Anything that you have to use for recovering in general is placed inside of those timers, and parsing everything out in the timers dramatically reduce the frame cost in general. And as long as you keep those processes within those functions clean, without loops and things like that, you can still keep a lot of things in those timers that processes at different intervals and still keep your frame rate well. A few things that I've added, if I go back to the viewport, this giant spear that is out here. This is actually used in place of me trying to do an area scan to see what all is around my character, to be able to update map information or interact up object lookups, or anything that I was using a general scan to do, which when I say scan, I mean like a trace. And any of those traces that I had before would eat up too much processing time. So now with this is a general catcher for whoever the main character is, to be able to get a list of objects or a pool of objects around me that I can use anywhere I need to do a check for items around the player. I can use this list to be able to determine if there's anything there, how close it is, and is much faster than trying to do the trace and then scanning through those objects. And pretty much I have different lists. So I have area objects in general, which are AI objects, character AI objects. I have zone triggers that I bring in to make sure that's there. If there's any destructible objects, I need that for mainly for the field actions when I do the little ground punch for one of the characters to break the brick. He needs to know if there's any destructible areas around the area that I punch, and I use this for that. And then you have just general interactive objects, which are new objects to the system that aren't NPCs but are just purely interactable objects, like a resource point or a treasure chest, things like that. And of course, when things exit that capsule area, we need to make sure that they're removed from our list, so that way we don't even have to bother about it in general. The size of this capsule is about the same size as what we use for the map, which is anything within 10,000 units of you. I do not have this as a scalable variable, so if you want to change the zoom rate of your map, I don't have this to where it can be dynamically updated. So if you for some reason wanted to add a zoom effect to your map, you would have to also change the scale of this actual object to match the zoom of your map, so that way it can gather less or greater data depending on what you're trying to do. And then this is the ambush capsule that I have that I use for when sliding. So this small little area around the character when I'm moving around, when I bump into an enemy, or if an enemy bumps into me in general, this can trigger the activation of a battle. Um, and like I was saying before, I may have to change this collision check to make sure that I can actually visually see what collided with this before I execute a battle. Because if for some reason an enemy is on the other side of a very thin wall, they could trigger this event and start a battle. So that's one thing I haven't added. But in general, if that happens to you, that's probably what you have to do, is just verify a line of sight before you actually execute the battle. As far as the PC hero goes in general, I tried my best to clean up the millions of functions that are in here and generally categorize, not characterize, their functions. So if they're part of the player init, they should be under here. If they're just general things in the system for the character, that's here. Any functions that are related to battle or damage, things like that, are in here. To just various actions like switching the player, activating our mount, interacting with an object, just things that could be called back from a parent class very easily. That can be done here. That's organized in here. Even though I'm not using action battles, I try to keep as much of those functions that I could while rewriting the system for turn-based, so that way if anyone wanted to use it, or if for some reason I wanted to switch back to an action based system, I could do that still. And I know some people have asked me about this to see if it's still in the system and if they can access it. So here's the input buffer. At the end of an attack, when you want to trigger the next move, it will come through here. Make sure that you're not dead or if you're, and it'll make sure you're not inside of any invalid states. It will clear any entries in your input buffer that have expired. And then get the next available input, and then based on, I have a stamina check here, but you can remove that. But based on the next skill, if there is one available, it'll go to your class moves, find out what tier you're currently in for your attack moves, and get the next ability based on that tier. So here's your current move tier, and every time you make an attack, you'll go through the combo chain and increment the move tier. And then based on whether it's a skill or a casting animation that's in it, it'll start that animation montage and execute that skill. And that's pretty much it. So if anyone wants to be able to use the attack system, the action battle system that I had before, is still there. And it's not the same one as the original release of this toolkit. It's the one that, if anyone's been following me, that's the one they saw at the top of the year that I was using and trying to refine right before I decided to go turn-based. Just because I just wanted something more interesting than an attack system in general. All the turn-based functions are here as well. And any of the things that I have on timers are in the timer section. There's not really much to go over in these functions. I try to make sure they're commented as much as possible. And the actual function call is long enough for a person to understand what this function does. So I wouldn't have to go into that much of a explanation within it to explain what it does and how it does it. As I said before, the PC hero can be parented. Many people have been asking me before to make sure that that they can use their customized character object or character blueprint with my system, and an easy way to do that, of which is why I removed anything that has to do with character input or anything like this out of this system. This object doesn't even have a camera within it, and it relies on the camera being set up within your main character blueprint. Of which, in this example, if we go over here to the hero folder, we have base hero. Base hero is pretty much a custom character that I have a first person cam, a damage meter. Well, actually no, that's inherited. I have a first person cam, and it should be a third person cam. There we go. That's the third person camera here as well. So any of the controls for moving the camera around and things like that within your scene will be here. Also added to this character a swimming component. The PC hero does not have a swimming component. This one does. So that means this character can swim in water, depending on your inputs and things like that when you're detected to be in water. Along with this, I made sure that I try to keep it as simple as possible for a character object. So I have just regular setting the follow cameras, the default camera when you load up that character, to setting the general arm length of the actual camera and how far it's going to be away from the player, to binding the events for the swimming component so that way I can have some kind of interaction with it. And then also the tick is as simple as I could do, as well as keeping track of the crouch mode and whether we're in water, all that general stuff. The controller. So in here is where I specify the controls. Again, I mostly use a general Xbox controller for most of my controls. So if the keyboard controls are either not working or just odd, you can change those wherever I have the input controls to be mapped to whatever you want to do for your game. So these are general moving controls. These are the camera controls. And these are the general controller controls that call different things back on the player. So to enable transport or the hoverboard, you can hit up. I do believe I have... Well, I don't have anything assigned to the left and right. Down is the whistle if you're in the main game. And then just regular interaction things for the actual character. See, right here for the action system. If you're in the battle screen, it'll call combo starter. Right now, when you're in the battle screen, the way I have it set up, you don't control a character. Your control is currently within the realm of a blueprint that controls the entire battle and all the little AI units that's within it. But if for some reason you were in a battle, in the battle screen, and you had possession of the actual character, it would use the input buffer to be able to, track the player's input to start a combo, which will come through here, see if we have anything in the input buffer. If we do, then it's going to start the attack based on what's in the input buffer. So those are some of the things that still existent in the system for those people that want to use the action system. I tried not to remove most of it. So you see it here. So I think I only had a high and low. So I think this was a low and this was a high when you do the input buffer. This is jumping, and this just executes field actions in general. But in general, all my character mapping is within this one controller operations. Um, and like I said, it's a very simple character. Not much in it outside of being able to crouch, being able to execute field actions, um, being able to run, things like that, being able to swim up, swim down if I'm in water. Um, but whatever character class that you have, if it's even more advanced than this, which it probably will be, but you can just parent your class. For those who don't know how to parent, if you go down to File and Reparent Blueprint, you can specify what you want this blueprint to be a child of. And then once you bind it to the PC hero, any function callbacks or things like that or operations that the PC hero does will also be included as part of your object. As long as you make sure that you call the parent tick and the parent begin of that object, everything should work properly. Okay, so along with the PC hero, we also have an AI mob. And the AI mob is used, let me verify before I say the wrong thing. Yes, the AI mob is only used in the field currently. So this will do just basic things for being able to detect the enemy, detect the player. It has functionalities for, if you want to see the HP of the enemies in the level, that's available. I don't think I show it here, but there's decals for lock on that are currently hidden. There's a HP widget that hovers above the enemy's head. So you can, if you want to, you can turn that on and see the enemy's HP or their name, general things like that. And then we spun the default controller for the AI. Similar to the PC hero, we have the sensing pawn that is used to be able to detect heroes within the area. So if the behavior tree for that area, for that enemy, is trying to see if there's any characters or stuff that's around them based on certain logic, it can look at this detected hero list from its sensing pawn object to be able to see, okay, these enemies are around me based on this. I need to do something with them and do logical checks to make sure that they are actually within sight and I can actually attack them. Same thing with detecting noise. That's one thing I didn't show in the character base, but when I move, depending on whether I'm walking or I'm crouching, I send out a sound signal to be able to trigger these noise detectors, so that way an enemy could hear me if I was walking really loud or running, and they would know the location, so that way they can investigate the location, and if they see me within that location, I will be added to their list, which could go back and check inside of their, their state machine for their AI logic to see whether they can attack me or not based on certain parameters. This would be if I leave the detection area. And then we have just like the simple tick in general. So inside of their tick, one thing I have done, similar to like the similar to the PC object or the PC hero, is I went through to try to truncate off as much tick costs that these objects are doing in the world as I could. One big component of this is the fact that the movement component, even if your character is so far away from the screen and they're not even moving, the movement component, the character movement component, is still taking up tick time. Is bogging down the system, no matter how far your NPC is away from you or how far any kind of actor is away from you, the character movement is killing your frames per second. So what I did here is, based on the distance away from the player, which is still scalable, I probably shouldn't have hard coded that, but based on the distance away from the player, the actor will disengage itself and shut down pretty much. If it doesn't need to be processed, it's just going to shut down until you're close enough for it to actually start processing and moving again. And this dramatically changed the frames per second that was used for operating, especially the behavior tree. So I stopped the behavior tree, I stopped the actor's tick, and I stopped the character movement component. And this shot my it pretty much dropped my frame rate cost down substantially, especially if I had a lot of enemies. And now I can actually put a plethora of enemies out, and if I'm not near them, they cost almost nothing to my tick. And even right here, I re-enable them once we come inside the area where they should exist and should activate and should, move around the world. So hopefully that helps a lot of other people that's been trying to get better frame rates as well. This is just stuff that I've been trying to research and hone in on to try to find some kind of common sense to this whole insanity. Update overhead is just the meter that exists above the enemy's head that shows its HP, its name, things like that. Again, this isn't a battle object. It was at first, but I kept this just in case for if I do like a in my game I have a scan, and when I scan out, I can see enemies' detail and information for ones that are close to me. So I could see things like their name, their level, how much HP they currently have, even though that's not really needed since it's not an open world action. I just left it there so I could just, see these elements and bring them back into my game as I progress it. For some reason, toggling the visibility of the lock-on of the character and the decal, constantly calling this in the tick, or maybe even calling it once in a build project, caused the engine to just suddenly crash. This did not happen in 4.20, but it is happening in 4.21. So hopefully after they've come out with some updates, this will be working again and I can connect these back. But the only thing it does is just lets you be able to lock into an enemy. So if you were sneaking around and you wanted to keep your eye on the enemy while sneaking around, you could lock onto them and just sneak around the corner while focusing on them. And then we have the processing of the death. So when an enemy is considered dead, even though again this is not a battle object anymore, but it used to be, we would process the the awards and the death animation and all that stuff for the enemy. Again, all these functions over here should be self-explanatory. If anyone actually needs me to go over a certain aspect or things like that, let me know, and hopefully I can make a video to explain it well, or just explain it in the email, depending on the difficulty of the question. Or if it's a common question, I'll answer it that way. For the NPCs, much less complicated. The NPCs pretty much start off with, because they're using the new animation class that I have, they still need a class defined, even though they don't necessarily need battle data. They still need the animation information that is held within a class to be able to actually process. Now, one thing that this does give the ability to do is to specify like animations for NPC type. So you have like, you know, an elderly male, an elderly female, hyperactive kid, or things like that that will have different animation types, but still the same movement flow for your environment. You can set that here by setting a different NPC class to that actual NPC character that you have on the field. And because of that, it can come in, load that class information, and then set its animation information at the start. After that, it's going to go in, look at its event object, and see if there's any equipped events, and then process that as its current active event, as well as loading any of the modular information that has been set up for when you put them in the field. So for instance, if I can turn this back on, if I go up to one of the NPCs that's out here, this NPC in particular does not have anything set up for its events, but it does have the fact that it's going to be a stationary NPC. If it does have events on it and I want it to hide when there's no event for it to process, I can check this, and if it doesn't have any events, then it becomes hidden when you play the game. I can also change this walking speed and information here. The pathing, for instance, this one over here is set up for a looping path, and based on these different waypoints, it will every 5 seconds go to a different waypoint in that list. And again, with stationary, if we go over here, say I have a stationary character that just, you know, he sweeps the grass as you go by through the city. You can have an animation of him sweeping the grass, and then after that he can go back to his regular class state that he's normally in for animation, and then ever so often he can go and sweep the ground again as part of that, you know, that regular NPC animation loop process. I think I'll go more over events in a minute, but just as a base operation for an NPC, this is all there is, really. The only in-depth thing there is the modular character, the modular generation of the NPC character, that I'm probably going to cover in a separate video. Otherwise, it's going to get really long for this video in general. So just like everything else, on the NPC tick, it can enable and disable itself. I have not had issues where the NPCs needed as heavy throttling as the enemies did, but I probably should add the same code that I have in the character objects that the NPCs have. Sorry, I said that wrong. I should add the same code that's inside of the mob AI that to the NPCs, so that way they can throttle down their movement and things like that based on the distance from the hero. I thought I added that, but I must be mistaken. But on another release, I can add that just in case NPCs start to bog down the level as well. Let's see. PC member isn't really used anymore. That was the first example of a parentable player class or parentable character object. It's not really used anymore. Things in here are pretty much probably out of date and not needed anymore, so you can just ignore this for right now. I'll probably delete it in the next release. Now we have a turn-based mob, which really doesn't have anything different within its settings outside of maybe like something that we can configure out here. But the only difference in here is really what the default behavior tree is for this AI. So this one uses the mob battle behavior tree, where the other one uses a field mob behavior tree for, you know, regular field monsters. Next, we have our interactive objects. So, be it a resource point like this, that may have, you know, some special item in it for, like, you know, any kind of resource point. It could be a potion. It could be something like that. It's just a basic object that you can use to be able to select in your world in general. With this, we have a general trigger event, which is used to trigger just an event object, not necessarily it awarding an item, because if it's like a treasure chest or anything like that. It's just used to, like here, it's used to trigger the event for this communication between the characters. A resource point is used to award, kind of like a treasure chest, is used to award the players with, you know, just resources in general. And a treasure chest can, you know, have this list of locked objects. So if I can scroll down, excuse me, I am losing all of the sections. I'm either crazy or crazy, because it should be here somewhere. There we go. Whew, it's pretty far down. So if I collapse all the stuff that I don't need about this object, which tells me I might need to make this treasure chest not of a character because it doesn't move or anything. If we get all the way down to our default events, so I can assign a list of events. Like for right here, I have play environmental audio event that is in the database. I can assign a list of events to this treasure box that will activate after the treasure box has been successfully opened. And then I can bake that event down to the bake list so it's saved. And then once the treasure chest is open, it will activate. I can also say that, hey, I want to look at, you know, a list of resources in my resource list. And I can filter that using this filter list. I can give this treasure box a unique name if I want to. I can give it a list of requirements. So if for some reason to open this, I need a gate key, and then I bake that to the list, I need a gate key to be able to open this treasure chest. So right now I need an event ID of 2, which may be the actual gate key that I think I can get from this resource point to be able to open this treasure chest. Oh, actually I need plasma. So this tells me that I need plasma to open this treasure chest. And then along with that item, the ID for that inside of the resource list is ID 2. I can register this treasure chest as a singleton object. What that means is, if I do not want this treasure chest reopened after you leave the map and come back, which would normally reload all the objects, I can register this in the database as a singleton treasure chest. So that means once it's opened once, it will not be able to be reopened again, and it will just stay open the next time you come over to the map. Now, for the loot, you can populate a loot list, tell it whether it's an item, weapon, armor, or resource, and select that item from the database. So let me see, items. So now my items are here. I have potions, whatever I want to put in the treasure chest. I select it. I can give it a drop rate. I cannot remember if drop rate is based on a 0 to 1 or 0 to 100. I'll just have to look that up to determine that. And that's actually within this object. But I can just use a drop rate and how many that will drop when it's actually open. Get rid of this. And then once I select the items that I want it to drop, I just bake the loot list to the bake list. The reason I have the bake list is because these lookup tables can only be generated within the Pi environment. And once you publish your games, they cannot. So I have to make sure that whatever I dynamically load here is baked into a list with its current IDs of whatever the thing is supposed to drop. And here you go. It's 0 to 100 for the drop rate. So this has a 100% chance of dropping a revival item. Let's see. In a similar way, the resource is set up the exact same way. If you can just drill all the way down to where it actually exists in this list, ignoring all the other character information that it may have in here. Here you go. So same setup as the treasure chest, except for, it's a different object, different presentation, things like that. And we already talked about the event trigger. So if you select the event trigger, as soon as the player enters into the area, you can trigger an event, which is the cutscene that I have set up before. Let's see. And I think I have a save point interactive object here as well, which is, again, it's like a zone box, as you can look right here. It's an interactive object with the area trigger. So if you want to trigger anything once you come within the box to automatically open the save, you can. But if not, you can turn that off and just have it to where, hey, as soon as I click the save point, it'll open the save point dialog, and I can save my game. Continue on with your game in general. So those are all the base character objects. The only other thing that is here that are just special objects are the character cutscene objects. So if you're making a cutscene with a sequence, when you add characters in, they can only be skeletal mesh components. So I inherited that class to add a little bit more functionality to the skeletal mesh so it can be used inside of an actual sequence and a cutscene. The only thing you have to do is just, after you place your character object there, or your cutscene actor, you will have to go in and actually load its actor information. So if I come down and refresh the list, what? Huh, I might have to look into this because it's not dynamically loading it. But what it should do is when I activate the refresh actor, it should give me a list of all the actors that I have for my in my actor list. Even if they're not a hero, I should be able to see a actor in this actor list, select it, and it will transform this cutscene actor into a current representation of that character in the scene. If for some reason during the runtime environment of that level, that character object changes to some other different look, if I put a different weapon on my back, or if I go to a character customization screen and change how I look, this character will update right before a cutscene happens to be able to make sure that it has a current and accurate representation of your current character within that cutscene. Again, I need to see why this isn't loading. I must have changed something that causes this this data field to not load, but the only thing you will have to do is just hit the refresh list. It loads in the data object, and then you can select what character you want to be. You want this actual representation of this character to be. Character viewer. This is what I have in general for loading a character in a GUI. This is pretty much just an object that has a actor in it that can load similar to the cutscene actor and load the character up so I can preview weapons and things like that on the character. And the camera there should be a camera actor within here. Yeah, here we go. The character viewer. This is a render target that will render the character based on this filter list. It will render the character and only the character to a texture with a mask that I can use within the GUI to be able to render that character to a GUI representation of itself. So whenever I have to use this, this is pretty much loaded somewhere far up into the stratosphere of the level so I can get an active live character rendered into the GUI. Again, I'm still working on that. As I said before, I'm having issues with the quality of the capture. But when I get that fully working, I'll update this as well. And then after that, there's just the basic flow for an enemy and a hero within the field, which changes depending on how you want it to be set up. And right now, it's a very basic general state machine for a character to, go and operate. I'll probably go into that more in depth in another video, but for now, that should cover all of the actual character objects, and see you in the next video, I guess.